The transport ship shuddered as it broke through Kepler-4 for 2C's atmosphere. And Dr. Elena Vasquez pressed her face to the porthole. Below stretched an endless canopy of crimson trees, their branches writhing in winds that could snap a human spine. Lightning crackled between storm clouds that never seemed to clear. And in the distance, she could see the jagged peaks of mountains that scraped the sky like broken teeth. Beautiful, isn't it? Captain Rex's voice dripped with sarcasm. The Altarian's blue scales rippled with what Alina had learned to recognize as amusement. Your species really knows how to pick vacation spots. Alina ignored the jab. She'd heard worse over the past 6 months since accepting this assignment. The Galactic Council's reaction to humanity's request to colonize. Kepler-4 for to see had ranged from bewilderment to outright laughter. The planet was classified as a Class 12 Deathworld, the highest rating on the danger scale. Nothing that evolved there should have been able to develop intelligence, let alone survive long enough to build a civilization. The preliminary scans show promising mineral deposits, Elena replied, keeping her voice steady. And the indigenous flora could revolutionize medical research. Captain Rex's laugh sounded like grinding metal. If you live long enough to collect samples, the last research team lasted exactly 4 hours. Alina had read the reports. The Valorian expedition had been comprised of their best warriors, beings who could survive in molten sulfur and wrestle star bears with their bare claws. They'd been torn apart by creatures the size of house cats within minutes of landing. Humans are different, she said. Yes, you're softer. The ship's landing thrusters fired, and Alina felt her stomach lurch. Through the porthole, she watched trees bend away from their descent, revealing a clearing that had been carved from the jungle by the previous expedition's crash site. Twisted metal and scorched earth marked where the Valorians had made their final stand. Last chance to reconsider. Captain Rex said as the ship settled with a bone-jarring thud. I can have you back to civilized space in 3 weeks. Alina shouldered her pack and checked her equipment one final time. The biosuit was humanity's latest design, adaptive nanofabric that could respond to environmental threats in real time. Her tools were similarly advanced, though she suspected they'd prove inadequate against whatever horrors waited outside. Thanks. But I have work to do. The airlock hissed open, and Alina stepped onto the surface of Kepler-4 to see for the first time. The air hit her like a physical blow, thick, humid, and charged with electricity that made her skin tingle. Her suit's readings went crazy for a moment before stabilizing. Confirming what the atmospheric data had suggested, the air was breathable. If barely, behind her, Captain Rex sealed the airlock without ceremony. The transport ship's engines were already spinning up for departure. Alina was alone on a world that had killed everything else that tried to claim it. The silence lasted exactly 30 seconds. A sound like breaking glass echoed from the tree line, followed by a chorus of shrieks that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Elena's suit detected movement in the undergrowth, dozens of heat signatures converging on her position. She drew her plasma pistol with steady hands, though she knew it would likely prove useless. The first creature emerged from the shadows like a nightmare-given form. It stood on 6 legs, each ending in claws that gleamed like obsidian. Its hide was covered in what looked like natural armor, and its head was nothing but teeth arranged around a gaping maw. 2 more flanked it, then 5, then a dozen. Alina had faced dangerous animals before, during her xenobiology studies, but nothing had prepared her for this. These creatures moved with intelligence, circling her with tactical precision. They were hunting her. She fired 3 shots in rapid succession, plasma bolts illuminating the clearing in brief blue flashes. The creatures scattered, but didn't retreat. If anything, they seemed to grow bolder, closing the distance with predatory patience. Come on then, Alina whispered, backing toward the crashed Valorian ship. Maybe she could find shelter among the wreckage. Buy herself enough time to think of a plan. The largest creature charged first, covering the distance between them in a heartbeat. Alina dove aside, feeling claws rake across her suit's back panel. The nanofabric held, but she could feel the material straining under the assault. She rolled to her feet and kept running, plasma pistol spitting death behind her. The creatures pursued with terrifying coordination, some staying high in the trees while others flanked her on the ground. They were driving her toward something. She could sense it in their movements. The wreckage of the Valorian ship loomed ahead, its hull split open like a cracked egg. Alina sprinted for the breach, diving through the opening just as claws raked the air where her head had been. She landed hard on twisted metal and scrambled deeper into the ship's interior. The creatures didn't follow her inside. They gathered at the entrance, making sounds that were almost like conversation. Alina pressed herself against the far wall and tried to steady her breathing. Her suit's bioreadings showed elevated stress hormones, but no serious injuries yet. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through the hull breach, Alina began to make out details of the Valorian ship's interior. The bridge was a chaos of sparking consoles and emergency lighting. 3 Valorian bodies lay crumpled near what had been the captain's chair, their armor rent by claw marks that went bone deep. But it was what she found in the ship's data core that made her blood run cold. The final log entries painted a picture of creatures that seemed to learn and adapt with impossible speed. The first attacks had been straightforward, overwhelming force applied without strategy. But within hours, the creatures had begun using tactics, coordinating their assaults, even using tools. They're intelligent, Alina breathed. Scrolling through the combat footage, not just predators. They're studying us. A sound from outside made her freeze. The creatures had gone quiet. Alina crept to the hull breach and peered out carefully. The clearing was empty, but she could feel eyes watching her from the shadows. They were waiting for something. Night was falling on Kepler-4 for to see. Alina was beginning to understand that darkness on this world meant something very different than it did on other planets. The jungle around her was coming alive with sounds that spoke of things that hunted in the black hours between sunset and dawn. She settled back against the ship's bulkhead and began to plan. The creatures were intelligent, which meant they could be reasoned with. They were also apex predators on a world that killed everything else, which meant they demanded respect. Alina had come to Kepler-4 to study its ecosystem, catalog its resources. But as she listened to the night hunters beginning their ancient songs of death, she realized she might be about to learn something far more valuable, what it truly meant to survive. Alina woke to the sound of metal being torn apart. Her biosuit had kept her warm through the frigid night. But now, dawn light, filtering through the hull breach, revealed fresh damage to the ship's exterior. Long gouges ran along the metal plating. Several sections had been completely peeled away like the skin of an orange. The creatures hadn't been idle while she slept. They'd been examining their trap. She gathered her equipment and made her way to the breach, moving as quietly as possible. The clearing beyond was empty, but the jungle pressed close on all sides. Somewhere in that green maze, dozens of predators waited with the patience that only apex species possessed. Alina's stomach growled, reminding her that she'd burned through her emergency rations during the night. Her water recycler was working, but food would become a problem within days. The Valorian emergency supplies had been contaminated when their life support failed. Leaving nothing but corroded containers and spoiled protein paste, she activated her suit's scanner and began analyzing the surrounding vegetation. Most of it registered as toxic to human physiology, but there were promising signs. Several fruit-bearing plants showed chemical signatures that suggested they might be edible with proper preparation. The problem was reaching them while avoiding becoming someone else's meal. Alina spent an hour studying the creatures' patrol patterns through her scope. They moved in groups of 3 to 5, maintaining overlapping coverage of the clearing's perimeter. But there were gaps, brief windows. When the undergrowth near the eastern tree line was unweighted, she waited for the next opening and sprinted for a cluster of blue-leafed shrubs she'd identified as potentially edible. Her boots squelched in mud that smelled of decay and growing things, and thorns caught at her suit as she pushed through the undergrowth. The fruits were the size of her fist, and had a crystalline quality that made them almost seem to glow. Alina's scanner confirmed they were safe for human consumption after basic processing. She filled her collection pouch and turned to retreat to the relative safety of the crashed ship. That's when she saw the eyes watching her from the shadows. The creature was different from the pack hunters. That had driven her to the wreck. Larger, with hide that seemed to shift color to match its surroundings. But it was the intelligence in its gaze that made Alina freeze. This wasn't the calculating hunger of a predator. It was the curiosity of a scientist observing a new species. They stared at each other for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Alina kept her hand away from her weapon, instinct telling her that sudden movements would be interpreted as aggression. The creature tilted its head, a gesture so familiar it was almost human. Then it spoke. The sounds weren't words in any language Alina recognized. There was clear intent behind them. Rhythm, inflection, questioning tones that suggested communication rather than mere vocalization. The creature was trying to talk to her. Alina's xenolinguistics training kicked in. She responded with simple tonal patterns, keeping her voice low and non-threatening. The creature's eyes widened, definitely surprise. It made another series of sounds, more complex this time. They were interrupted by the arrival of the pack hunters. 5 of the smaller creatures burst from the undergrowth, moving to surround Alina with military precision. But they stopped short when the larger creature made a sharp sound that was clearly a command. Alina watched in fascination as the pack hunters backed away, though they maintained their defensive positions. The large creature stepped closer, and Alina could see details that had been hidden in the shadows. Its hide wasn't just camouflaged. It was covered in scarification that formed intricate patterns. Cultural markings. This was no mere animal. You're the leader, Alina said softly. The alpha of this territory. The creature's head tilt became more pronounced. It approached slowly, each step deliberate and careful. Alina forced herself to remain still as claws that could shred steel came within arm's reach of her throat. The creature leaned close and inhaled deeply, learning her scent. Then it did something that changed everything. It touched its clawed hand to its chest and made a specific sound. A name. It was introducing itself. Alina pressed her hand to her own chest. Alina, she said clearly. The creature repeated the sound, its pronunciation surprisingly accurate. Then it gestured to its pack and made other sounds, introducing his followers by name. Over the next hour, Lena found herself engaged in the most extraordinary first contact situation in human history. The creatures, she'd mentally started thinking of them as the Kepler pack, were not only intelligent, but possessed a complex social structure. The leader, whose name sounded like Kresh to Elena's ears, commanded absolute respect from his subordinates. But more importantly, they were curious about her in return. Kresh led Alina to a natural amphitheater carved from the jungle floor, where more of his kind had gathered. Alina counted at least 30 individuals, all watching her with the same intelligent interest she'd seen in their leader. Some were smaller, possibly younger members of the pack. Others bore scars that spoke of battles with creatures Alina couldn't even imagine. They brought her food, processed fruits, and what looked like cooked meat from some kind of jungle fowl. Elena's scanner confirmed it was safe to eat, and the gesture of sharing a meal carried universal meaning as she ate. Alina began to understand the true scope of what she'd discovered. The Kepler pack weren't just apex predators, they were a civilization. She could see evidence of tool use, of planning and preparation. They had turned the jungle into their domain through intelligence and cooperation. The attack on the Valorian expedition hadn't been mindless predation. It had been warfare. Kresh seemed to sense her growing understanding. He led her to the edge of the amphitheater and pointed toward distant mountains. His sounds took on a more urgent quality, and Alina began to pick out repeated patterns. Geography, territory markers, warning calls. There were others out there. Other packs, other territories. And from what Alina could gather from Kresh's warnings, not all of them were as welcoming to outsiders as his pack had proven to be as the day wore on. Alina found herself being accepted into the pack's daily routines. She was given her own sleeping space and included in their evening meal. But more than that, she was being taught. Kresh and his lieutenants showed her which plants were safe to eat, where to find clean water, and how to move through the jungle without attracting the attention of the things that hunted in the deeper darkness. They were showing her how to survive on Kepler 4, for 2C not. as a human trying to impose her will on an alien world, but as a member of the ecosystem that had evolved here when night fell. Alina lay in her designated spot within the pack's protective circle and listened to their soft communication calls. She was beginning to recognize individual voices, to understand the subtle differences in tone that conveyed meaning, for the first time since landing on the Deathworld. Alina felt something she hadn't expected. She felt safe. The creatures that the galaxy had dismissed as mindless killing machines had welcomed her into their family, but as she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that her real trials were just beginning. Kresh's warnings about the other territories echoed in her mind, and she found herself wondering what kind of civilization could thrive on a world where even the apex predators lived in constant warfare. 3 weeks with the Kepler pack had transformed Alina in ways she was only beginning to understand. Her movements through the jungle had become fluid and silent, her reflexes sharpened by constant awareness of predators that could emerge from any shadow. Most importantly, she'd begun to think like the pack. Kresh had proven to be not just a leader, but a teacher. Under his guidance, Alina learned to read the subtle signs that warned of approaching storms, to identify the tracks of creatures that even the pack avoided, and to understand the complex territorial boundaries that divided the continent to competing domains. The pack's language was becoming clearer to her each day. Their communication system was far more sophisticated than she'd initially realized, incorporating not just vocalizations but body language, scent markers, and even scratched symbols on trees that served as territorial maps. Alina was documenting everything in her suit's memory banks, building what would become the first comprehensive study of Kepler-4 for 2C's dominant intelligence. But her role was evolving beyond that of an observer. The pack had begun to rely on her unique abilities. Her plasma pistol had proven invaluable during a territorial dispute with a neighboring pack. Alina's accurate shooting had helped Kresh's warriors drive off invaders without suffering casualties. More importantly, her suit sensors could detect threats that even the pack's enhanced senses might miss, but it was her human adaptability that had truly earned their respect. Crisis came when one of the younger pack members, a female Alina had named Swift for her incredible speed, fell seriously ill after eating contaminated prey. The pack's traditional remedies weren't working, and Swift was dying. Alina's medical training kicked in. She analyzed Swift's symptoms and compared them to her growing database of local flora. The contamination was from a fungal parasite that attacked the nervous system, similar to conditions Alina had studied on other worlds. Working through the night, Alina synthesized a treatment using compounds from 3 different native plants. The pack watched in tense silence as she administered the medicine, their trust in her absolute despite the risks. Swift recovered within hours. Word of Alina's healing abilities spread to other packs. Through the complex communication networks that connected the territorial domains, she began receiving visits from other pack leaders, each seeking her help with their own problems. Some came with sick or injured members. Others brought territorial disputes that required neutral arbitration. Alina found herself becoming something unprecedented in the history of Kepler-4 to see a mediator between packs that had been enemies for generations. Her growing reputation attracted attention from beyond the local territories. The first sign of trouble came when Kresh's scouts returned from the eastern boundaries with disturbing reports. A new pack had moved into the region, larger and more aggressive than any they'd encountered before. But these weren't ordinary territorial rivals. They called themselves the Crimson Claws, and their leader was a creature named Vex, who ruled through terror rather than respect. Unlike the other packs, the Crimson Claws didn't just hunt for territory or resources. They hunted for sport, leaving trails of destruction that violated the careful balance the other packs maintained. Kresh brought Alina to a ridge overlooking the disputed territory. Through her scope, she could see the devastation Vex's pack had wrought. Entire groves had been stripped bare, water sources polluted, and the bodies of smaller predators left to rot in the sun. They're not just conquering, Alina realized. They're destroying the ecosystem. Kresh's response was a series of guttural, sounds that Alina had learned to recognize as profound anger. The Crimson Claws weren't just threatening his territory, they were threatening the entire regional balance that had allowed multiple packs to coexist. Alina began to understand the true scope of the crisis. Kepler-4 for Sea wasn't just a death world where mindless predators battled for survival. It was a complex ecosystem with its own rules and traditions, carefully maintained by intelligent species that understood the value of balance. The Crimson Claws were an aberration, a pack that had rejected the natural order in favor of endless expansion and destruction that night. Representatives from 7 different packs gathered in Kresh's territory for an unprecedented council of war. Alina watched in fascination as ancient enemies sat together. United by their recognition of a common threat, the debate lasted until dawn. With each pack leader contributing their knowledge of Vex's capabilities and tactics, Alina found herself serving as translator and strategist, her unique perspective helping the leaders find common ground. But it was clear that conventional warfare wouldn't be enough. The Crimson Claws were too numerous and too ruthless. They fought without honor or restraint. Using tactics that the other packs found morally repugnant, we need to change the rules of engagement, Alina told the assembled leaders. Fighting them on their terms means becoming like them. She outlined a strategy that combined human, military doctrine with the pack's intimate knowledge of the terrain. Instead of direct confrontation, they would use coordinated strikes to disrupt the Crimson Claws' supply lines and communication networks. But the key element of Alina's plan was psychological warfare. The Crimson Claws ruled through fear and intimidation. Alina proposed to turn that strength into a weakness by proving that they weren't invincible. The first phase of the campaign began at dawn. While Alina coordinated the overall strategy from Kresh's command posts, pack warriors struck simultaneously at 3 Crimson Claw outposts. The attacks were perfectly timed, hitting the enemy during their most vulnerable moments. Alina's role evolved from advisor to field commander. Her suit's communications array allowed her to maintain contact with all allied forces, coordinating their movements with a precision that the Crimson Claws couldn't match. But it was during the second phase of the campaign that Alina truly proved her worth as a leader. When one of the allied packs was ambushed and cut off from retreat, Alina didn't hesitate to lead a rescue mission personally, racing through the jungle at speeds that would have been suicidal weeks before. Alina arrived at the battle site to find 6 allied warriors surrounded by twice as many Crimson Claws, her plasma pistol carved through the enemy ranks while she shouted orders in the pack language, organizing a defense that held until reinforcements arrived. The rescue missions. Success marked a turning point in the war. Alina was no longer just a human who had learned to survive on Kepler-4, for to see she had become something new. A hybrid of human intelligence and pack instincts, capable of thinking and fighting like a native of the Deathworld. Word of her achievements spread throughout the continent. Pack leaders who had never acknowledged outsiders began seeking her counsel. Young warriors asked to train under her guidance, but Alina knew the war was far from over. Vex still commanded a formidable force, and the Crimson Claws' hit-and-run tactics were becoming increasingly desperate and vicious. The final confrontation was inevitable, and Alina found herself preparing not just for battle, but for the possibility that she might need to challenge Vex directly. The pack laws were clear. Leadership disputes could be settled through single combat, as she sharpened her weapons and reviewed intelligence reports on Vex's capabilities. Alina reflected on how far she'd come from the xenobiologist who had landed on Kepler 442c months before. She was no longer studying the Deathworld's ecosystem. She had become part of it. The war against the Crimson Claws had been raging for 2 months when Alina made the discovery that changed everything. Deep in Vex's captured territory, hidden beneath layers of corrupted vegetation, she found the ruins of an ancient city. The structures were clearly built by the same species as the modern packs, but their scale and sophistication suggested a civilization that had reached heights the current tribes could barely imagine. Towering spires rose from the jungle floor, their surfaces carved with the same territorial markings Alina had learned to read. But organized into complex patterns that resembled written language, your ancestors built this. Lena told Kresh as they explored the ruins together. This entire species once had a unified civilization. Kresh's response was a mix of awe and sorrow. Through their developing communication system, he explained that the ruins were called the first domain in the old stories. Legends spoke of a time when all packs were united under a single leader, when the species had tamed not just their immediate territories but the entire planet, Elena's. Archaeological training took over as she documented the site. The city's layout revealed advanced understanding of engineering and urban planning. Aqueducts brought fresh water from mountain springs, while carefully designed drainage systems managed the torrential rains that regularly flooded the lowlands. But it was in the central complex that Elena made the most shocking discovery. The building had clearly been a seat of government, its halls filled with carved records that chronicled the rise and fall of the first domain. Elena worked feverishly to translate the ancient script, cross-referencing it with the modern pack language sheet. Learned, the story that emerged was both inspiring and tragic. The first domain had been founded by a leader whose name translated roughly as Unity Bringer, a figure who had united the warring packs. Through a combination of military genius and diplomatic skill, under his rule, the species had built cities, developed agriculture, and even begun exploring space travel. But the Golden Age had ended in catastrophe. The record spoke of a great civil war, triggered by a leader who rejected the principles of balance and cooperation that had made the first domain possible. This ancient tyrant, whose name was recorded as Vex the Destroyer, had led a faction that valued conquest over harmony. Elena's blood ran cold as she read the final entries. The ancient Vex had been defeated, but at terrible cost. The civil war had destroyed the cities, scattered the survivors, and reduced the unified civilization to the territorial pack system that existed today. The modern Vex wasn't just an aggressive pack leader. He was carrying on the legacy of the ancient destroyer, who had brought down the first domain. History is repeating itself, Elena realized. The same conflict that destroyed your golden age is happening again. Kresh's reaction to this revelation was profound. The discovery that their current enemy shared a name with the legendary destroyer convinced him that this wasn't just a territorial war, it was a battle for the soul of their species. Word of Elena's discovery spread through the allied packs like wildfire. The ruins became a pilgrimage site, with pack leaders traveling from across the continent to see the evidence of their people's lost greatness. More importantly, the historical precedent gave them hope that unity was possible again. But the discovery also drew Vex's attention. The Crimson Claws launched a massive assault on the ruins, clearly intending to destroy the evidence of the ancient civilization. Elena found herself commanding the defense of the archaeological site, turning ancient corridors into defensive positions and using the city's own architecture as weapons. The battle for the first domain lasted 3 days. Elena's forces were outnumbered 2-1, but they had the advantage of fighting on prepared ground. The ancient builders had designed their city to be defensible, with multiple fallback positions and hidden passages that allowed for tactical retreats. Elena used every lesson she'd learned about pack warfare, combined with human military doctrine and the unique advantages of the ancient city's layout. She turned the Crimson Claws' aggression against them, luring their forces into kill zones where concentrated firepower could devastate their ranks. But the most important moment of the battle came when Elena found herself face-to-face with Vex himself. The modern destroyer was everything Elena had expected from the historical accounts, larger than most pack leaders, his hide bearing scars from countless battles, his eyes holding the cold intelligence of someone who had made cruelty into an art form. But what struck Elena most was his obvious intelligence. This wasn't a mindless beast. He was a brilliant military. It's a commander who had chosen destruction as a philosophy. So you're the human who thinks she can unite the packs. Vex's voice carried an accent Elena had never heard before. Archaic, formal, suggesting he'd somehow preserved elements of the ancient language. Do you know what happened to the last Unity Bringer? Elena drew her plasma pistol, though she knew it would be inadequate against Vex's natural armor and enhanced reflexes. I know his civilization lasted longer than yours will. The fight that followed was unlike anything Alina had experienced. Vex moved with the grace of a dancer and the lethality of a natural disaster. His claws could shred steel, his speed made him nearly impossible to target, and his tactical intelligence allowed him to anticipate her every move. But Alina had advantages he hadn't expected. Her human flexibility allowed her to fight in ways no pack warrior would consider, using the environment in unconventional ways. More importantly, she fought with a different philosophy, where Vex saw only the next kill. Alina saw the larger pattern of battle. She led him through the ruins. Using her knowledge of the ancient architecture to her advantage, crumbling walls became cover, collapsed floors became obstacles, and hidden passages became escape routes. She turned the fight into a chess match where her understanding of the terrain counted more than raw physical power. The decisive moment came when Alina led Vex into the central chamber where she'd first discovered the historical records. As he lunged for what he thought would be a killing blow, Alina activated charges she'd planted in the ancient support columns. The ceiling came down in a controlled collapse that trapped Vex under tons of stone. As the dust settled, Alina stood over the buried destroyer. Her plasma pistol trained on his head. "Yield," she commanded in the formal pack language, Vex's response was a sound she'd never heard before. Laughter that held no humor, only bitter acknowledgement of defeat. "You fight like the old stories said humans would. Perhaps there's hope for your species after all." His surrender sent shockwaves through both armies. The Crimson Claws, leaderless and demoralized, began to scatter. But Alina surprised everyone by offering them a choice: exile or integration into the allied packs under strict conditions. It was a decision that would echo through history. In the weeks that followed, Alina found herself being hailed as more than just a successful military commander. Pack leaders from across the continent began referring to her by a new title, one that roughly translated as Unity Bringer, the parallel to the ancient leader who had founded the first domain wasn't lost on anyone. Alina had proven that it was possible to unite the packs, to create something greater than the sum of their individual territories. But as she stood in the ruins of the ancient city, surrounded by representatives of a dozen different packs who looked to her for leadership, Alina realized that her greatest challenge wasn't behind her. It was just beginning. 6 months after the defeat of Vex, the Destroyer, Alina stood before the first Continental Assembly in over 1,000 years. Representatives from 47 different packs had gathered in the rebuilt chambers of the first domain, their presence marking the beginning of something unprecedented in modern pack history. Alina had spent the intervening months traveling across the continent, negotiating treaties and establishing the framework for what she hoped would become a new golden age. The task had been exhausting, requiring her to master not just the political complexities of interpack relations, but also the deeper cultural traditions that governed how the species made collective decisions. The assembly hall had been reconstructed using both ancient architectural principles and modern pack engineering techniques. The result was a space that honored the past while serving the needs of the present, much like the political structure Alina was trying to build. "The old ways are ending," she addressed the assembled delegates in the formal pack language she had now completely mastered, but we have the chance to create something better than what came before. The challenges facing the new alliance were enormous. Generations of territorial warfare had left deep scars, and many pack leaders remained skeptical of any authority beyond their own domains. Alina's role as Unity Bringer was largely ceremonial. She could propose and mediate, but she couldn't force compliance. But her influence had grown beyond what anyone could have predicted. Her success against the Crimson Claws had established her military credentials, while her discovery of the ancient ruins had given her cultural authority. Most importantly, her human perspective allowed her to see solutions that pack leaders, trapped in traditional thinking patterns, might miss. The first major test came when territorial disputes erupted between 3 allied packs over access to a critical water source. Under the old system, such conflicts would have been settled through warfare, with the victor claiming total control and the losers forced to relocate or die. Alina proposed something radical: shared management of the resource under assembly oversight. The idea was met with shocked silence. Packs had never shared territory in the entire recorded history of the species. But as Alina worked with the pack leaders to develop implementation details, the wisdom of her approach became clear. Shared management would be more efficient than conquest, eliminating the resource waste that came with territorial warfare. More importantly, it would establish precedent for future cooperation. The Water Rights Agreement became the foundation for a broader system of interpack cooperation. Within months, similar arrangements were being negotiated for mineral deposits, hunting grounds, and defensive positions. The continent was being transformed from a patchwork of hostile territories into something resembling a functional confederation. But Alina's most ambitious project was yet to come. Deep in the archives of the First Domain, she had discovered technical specifications for technologies the ancient civilization had developed: star charts, engineering blueprints, and most intriguingly, designs for spacecraft that could handle the extreme conditions of interplanetary travel. The ancient Pack civilization had been on the verge of expanding beyond Kepler 442c when the Civil War destroyed their society. Alina began to wonder if the modern alliance could succeed where their ancestors had failed. She shared her findings with the Assembly's newly formed Science Council, a body that brought together the most knowledgeable individuals from each pack. The reaction was divided between excitement and caution. "The stars called to our ancestors," said Kresh, who had become Alina's closest advisor and the de facto leader of the Science Council. "Perhaps they call to us as well." But other pack leaders expressed concerns about the wisdom of expanding beyond their homeworld when they had barely managed to unite the continent. The memory of how ancient ambitions had led to civil war was still fresh from Alina's historical discoveries. Alina found herself walking a careful balance between visionary leadership and practical politics. She pushed for ambitious projects that would give the Alliance concrete goals to work toward, while ensuring that each step built upon solid foundations of trust and cooperation. Her breakthrough came when long-range scouts reported contact with pack settlements on the southern continent. Alina had assumed that her alliance represented the entire surviving population of the species, but apparently, isolated communities had survived the fall of the First Domain on other continents as well. The discovery offered both opportunity and danger. If the southern packs could be brought into the alliance, the unified civilization would have access to resources and knowledge that could accelerate their development by decades. But contact with outsiders also risked exposing the fragile new confederation to external threats. Alina proposed a carefully planned diplomatic mission to establish contact with the southern settlements. She would personally lead a small expedition, accompanied by representatives from each of the major allied packs. The mission would be one of exploration and diplomacy. Designed to assess whether the southern communities could become part of the growing alliance, the journey across the equatorial ocean proved to be more challenging than anyone had anticipated. The waters between the continents were dominated by massive sea creatures that made the Orient-based predators seem tame by comparison. Elaine's expedition was forced to develop new technologies just to survive the crossing, submersible vehicles that could dive beneath the notice of the aquatic behemoths, and navigation systems that could function in the planet's chaotic magnetic field. But it was worth the effort. The southern continent revealed pack settlements that had developed along completely different lines from Alina's alliance. Where the northern packs had maintained their traditional territorial structure, the southern communities had evolved into city-states that combined multiple pack bloodlines into single urban centers. The largest of these cities, built into the caldera of an extinct volcano, housed over 10,000 individuals. Alina was amazed by their architectural achievements: soaring bridges that spanned the caldera's width, vertical farms that climbed the volcanic walls, and workshops that produced tools and weapons of exceptional quality. But what impressed Alina most was their social structure. The southern packs had solved the problem of interpack cooperation through intermarriage and cultural fusion. Rather than maintaining separate territorial identities, They had created hybrid communities that drew strength from diversity. "You've achieved what we're still struggling toward," Lena admitted to the Southern Confederation's elected council. True unity rather than mere alliance. The Southern leaders, in turn, were fascinated by Elena's accounts of the Continental Alliance and the rediscovery of the First Domain. They shared their own oral histories, which included details about the ancient civilization that had been lost in the Northern archives. Most intriguingly, the Southern Confederation had maintained contact with pack settlements on other continents. Alina learned that surviving communities existed on all 7 of Kepler-4 for 2C's major landmasses, each having developed unique solutions to the challenges of post-collapse civilization. The implications were staggering. The species wasn't just surviving, it was thriving in dozens of different forms across the planet. Elena's Continental Alliance was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Over the following weeks, Alina negotiated the Southern Accords, a treaty that established formal relations between her Northern Alliance and the Southern Confederation. The agreement included provisions for technology exchange, joint exploration missions, and mutual defense against external threats. But the real breakthrough came when the Southern leaders agreed to contribute their ocean-crossing technologies to a joint project that Alina had been developing in secret. Using the ancient star charts from the First Domain archives, combined with Southern engineering expertise, they began construction of the first interplanetary vessel built by the species in over a millennium. The project became a symbol of what unified cooperation could achieve. Pack engineers from across both continents contributed their expertise, while Alina coordinated the massive undertaking and adapted human engineering principles to complement native technologies. The spacecraft that took shape in the Southern Confederation's orbital construction facility was a marvel of hybrid design. Its hull incorporated the adaptive armor techniques that the packs had developed for surviving in hostile environments, while its propulsion systems used principles Alina had extracted from the ancient technical archives. But more than just a technological achievement, the ship represented something profound about what the species was becoming. Alina had originally come to Kepler-4 for it to see as an outside observer, but she was now leading the planet's dominant intelligence toward a future that neither humans nor packs could have achieved alone. As the launch date approached, Alina found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her from a xenobiologist studying a Deathworld to the architect of an interplanetary civilization. The galaxy had dismissed Kepler 442c as uninhabitable, its inhabitants as mindless predators. They were about to discover how wrong they had been. The first test flight was scheduled to carry a mixed crew to Kepler-442c's nearest moon, a dead world that would serve as a proving ground for the technologies and techniques needed for true interstellar travel. Alina had insisted on being part of the crew, despite concerns from both human and pack advisors about the risks involved. As she stood in the ship's command center, surrounded by pack officers who looked to her for leadership, Alina realized that she had become something unprecedented in galactic history. She was no longer human or pack, but something new. A bridge between species that had allowed both to transcend their individual limitations. The countdown began, and Alina felt the familiar mixture of excitement and terror that accompanied every leap into the unknown. But this time, she wasn't facing the challenge alone. She was surrounded by allies who had learned to trust not just her leadership, but each other. The engines ignited, and Alina's hybrid civilization took its first step toward the stars. The first contact with the Galactic Council occurred exactly 18 months after Alina's successful moon landing. A Council survey ship dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler system, expecting to find either a dead world or the scattered remains of failed colonization attempts. Instead, they found a thriving, spacefaring civilization. Alina watched the alien vessels approach from the command deck of the Unity Station, the orbital platform that had become the headquarters of the Kepler Confederation. Around her, pack officers monitored communications arrays and defensive systems with the quiet competence that had become the hallmark of their hybrid society. Their broadcasting standard council greeting protocols, reported Swift, who had become Elena's chief communications officer after recovering from her near-fatal illness years before. But their biosignatures suggest extreme agitation. Elena wasn't surprised. The Council had categorized Kepler-4 as uninhabitable and its native species as presentient predators. Finding advanced technology and organized space traffic would challenge everything they thought. They knew about Deathworld evolution. "Open a channel," Elena commanded. "Let's introduce ourselves properly." The face that appeared on the main screen belonged to Captain Rex, the same Altarian who had dropped Elena off on the planet's surface over 2 years ago. His blue scales had lost their confident shimmer, replaced by the mottled patterns that indicated shock and confusion. "This is impossible," he said without preamble. "The human died. We monitored the landing site for weeks. Nothing could have survived." Elena smiled, noting how her pack officers straightened with pride at the implied insult. They had all learned to take fierce satisfaction in exceeding galactic expectations. "Captain Rex," she replied in perfect galactic standard. "As you can see, reports of my death were greatly exaggerated. Welcome to the Kepler system. I'm afraid you'll need to update your charts. This sector is no longer uninhabited." The conversation that followed was one of the most satisfying of Elena's life. She watched Rex struggle to process evidence that contradicted everything the Council believed about Deathworld species. The existence of the Unity Station was proof enough that the native intelligence was far more advanced than anyone had suspected. But Elena had more surprises to reveal. "I'm transmitting our territorial claims and shipping schedules," she told the stunned captain. "You'll find that Kepler Confederation vessels now operate throughout this system, and several neighboring ones. We've been very careful to follow Council protocols regarding space traffic and resource extraction." That was an understatement. Elena's legal team, a mix of human expertise and pack cunning, had spent months studying galactic law to ensure their expansion would be unassailable from a regulatory standpoint. The Confederation's territorial claims were meticulously documented and submitted through proper channels, but it was the nature of those claims that truly shocked the galactic community within days of Captain Rex's report reaching Council headquarters. Elena received a priority communication from the Secretary General herself. The Valdorian's multiple eyes blinked in rapid succession as she tried to process the implications of Elena's transformation. "Dr. Vasquez," the Secretary General began, "the Council is confused by recent developments in the Kepler system. Our records indicate that you were conducting a preliminary survey of a Class 12 Deathworld. Now, we're receiving claims for territorial expansion spanning multiple star systems." Elena had prepared for this conversation. She activated holographic displays showing the Confederation's current holdings, a network of mining operations, research stations, and defensive platforms that stretched across 6 systems. "The situation has evolved beyond our original mission parameters," Elena replied diplomatically. "The native species proved to be far more advanced than Council assessments suggested. After establishing peaceful relations, I was invited to serve as a diplomatic liaison between the Kepler Confederation and the galactic community." The Secretary General's response revealed the depth of the Council's miscalculation. For millennia, they had dismissed Deathworld species as evolutionary dead ends, too focused on survival to develop advanced civilization. The existence of the Confederation challenged fundamental assumptions about how intelligence developed under extreme conditions, but Elena's real bombshell was yet to come. "The Kepler Confederation extends an invitation to the Galactic Council," she announced. "We would be honored to host a full diplomatic mission to discuss mutual recognition and potential alliance." The silence that followed was profound. In galactic history, new species typically spent decades or centuries proving themselves worthy of Council membership. Elena was proposing to skip that process entirely, claiming equal status from a position of demonstrated strength. The political implications were staggering. If the Council recognized the Confederation as an equal power, it would set precedent for other Deathworld species to demand similar treatment. The carefully maintained hierarchy that placed civilized species above primitive ones would crumble overnight, but Alina held cards that the Council couldn't ignore. The Confederation's rapid expansion had given them control of some of the richest resource deposits in the local galactic arm. Their military technology, evolved in the crucible of Deathworld survival, was proving superior to Council designs in several key areas. Most importantly, their hybrid civilization was demonstrating innovations that pure species societies had never achieved. Elena's negotiating position was further strengthened by support from unexpected quarters. Human colonies throughout Council space had begun expressing interest in Confederation membership. Attracted by Elena's success in creating a society that honored both human adaptability and local strengths, the preliminary diplomatic mission that arrived 6 months later was the largest in Council history. Representatives from over 50 species came to witness the miracle of Kepler 442c, a death world that had not only produced advanced civilization, but had welcomed outside influence to create something unprecedented. Alina personally guided the diplomatic tour, showcasing everything the Confederation had achieved. Packed cities that rivaled the galaxy's greatest metropolises, orbital facilities that pushed the boundaries of engineering possibility, most importantly, a society where beings who should have been natural enemies worked together with seamless cooperation. The Council delegates were particularly impressed by the Confederation's approach to warfare. Instead of the total conflicts that characterized most galactic disputes, PAC military doctrine emphasized precision strikes designed to minimize casualties while achieving strategic objectives. It was warfare evolved for a world where resources were too precious to waste on meaningless destruction, but Elena's masterstroke came during the formal recognition ceremony. As the Council prepared to grant the Confederation junior membership, a significant honor for such a young society, Alina politely declined. "We appreciate the offer," she told the assembled delegates, "but the Kepler Confederation seeks full membership with voting rights and territorial protection. We believe our contributions to galactic civilization merit equal treatment." The audacity of the demand left the Council speechless. Alina was asking for privileges that typically took centuries of proven cooperation to earn. But as she outlined the Confederation's proposals for technological exchange, resource sharing, and mutual defense, the wisdom of her position became clear. The Kepler Confederation wasn't asking to join galactic civilization as a junior partner. They were offering to lead it in new directions. The debate that followed lasted for weeks, with Council factions arguing over the implications of Elena's proposal. Conservative elements worried about setting dangerous precedents, while progressives saw an opportunity to revitalize a galactic community that had grown stagnant over millennia. Alina waited patiently for their decision. Knowing that she held the ultimate trump card, the Confederation had already proven it could thrive without Council approval. Recognition would be welcome, but it wasn't necessary. When the vote finally came, it was closer than anyone had expected. The Kepler Confederation was granted full membership by a margin of 3 votes, making them the youngest society ever to achieve such status. But Alina knew that formal recognition was just the beginning. The real work of transformation was yet to come, and it would require her to navigate the complex politics of galactic civilization with the same skill she had shown in uniting the packs of a death world. As she stood before the Council Assembly to deliver her first address as the Confederation's representative, Alina reflected on the journey that had brought her from a xenobiologist, studying dangerous predators, to the leader of a galactic power. The galaxy had underestimated both humanity and the pack species. Now it was time to show them what their hybrid civilization could truly achieve. 5 years after gaining Council membership, Alina stood in her private quarters aboard the Confederation flagship Unity's Dream, watching the stars shift as they dropped out of hyperspace. Through the viewport, she could see the blue-green marble of Kepler 442c growing larger as they approached home. She had just concluded the most successful diplomatic mission in the Confederation's short history. 3 more Deathworld species had requested membership in their alliance. Drawn by the promise of transformation that Elena's hybrid civilization represented, the galaxy was beginning to understand that what they had dismissed as evolutionary dead ends were actually humanity's greatest potential partners. "Your Majesty," came a familiar voice from behind her. Alina turned to see Kresh approaching, his movements showing the slight stiffness that came with age, but his eyes still bright with intelligence. "The homecoming preparations are complete." Alina smiled at the title she had never quite grown comfortable with. The Confederation had insisted on crowning her as their queen after the successful council negotiations, arguing that her unique position as bridge between species required formal recognition. She had accepted reluctantly, knowing that symbols mattered in galactic politics. "Thank you, old friend. Are the new ambassadors settling in well?" Kresh's expression showed satisfaction. "The Regilian delegation is adapting better than expected. Their silicon-based physiology actually gives them advantages in our high radiation environments. The vegan empire representatives are having more difficulty, but Swift has been working with their environmental teams." Alina nodded. The Confederation had become a beacon for species that didn't fit neatly into the Council's traditional categories. Deathworld survivors, hybrid societies, and evolutionary outliers all found acceptance in an alliance that celebrated diversity rather than merely tolerating. As they entered Kepler-44 to seize atmosphere, Alina could see the transformation that 5 years of galactic membership had brought to her adopted world. The continent-spanning cities now gleamed with advanced technologies, while orbital elevators connected the surface to industrial platforms that processed resources from across the Confederation's expanding territories. But it was the cultural changes that impressed Alina most. The unity spires that rose from each major city weren't just architectural marvels, they were symbols of a society that had learned to synthesize the best elements from dozens of different species. The homecoming ceremony took place in the Great Assembly, the rebuilt hall where Alina had first proposed the Continental Alliance years before, but now the chamber held representatives from 23 different species, all united under the Confederation banner. Alina's speech that day would be remembered as one of the defining moments of the new galactic age. She spoke not as a human addressing aliens, but as a citizen of a civilization that had transcended the boundaries of species and world. "When I first landed on this world," she told the assembled delegates, "the galaxy saw only a death world populated by mindless predators. They saw a human scientist who would inevitably become another casualty of hostile evolution." Audience included many who had been present during those early days, pack warriors who had become admirals and engineers, human researchers who had joined the expedition later and found homes among the growing alliance. Their faces showed pride in how far they had all traveled together. What they failed to understand, Alina continued, was that adversity doesn't create weakness, it creates strength. The harshest environments don't produce failures, they produce survivors. And survivors, when they learn to cooperate instead of merely compete, become something the galaxy had never seen before. The ceremony concluded with the unveiling of the Confederation's most ambitious project yet, the Deep Space Exploration Initiative. Using technologies developed through interspecies cooperation, they plan to push beyond the known galaxy and search for other civilizations that might benefit from their hybrid approach. But Alina's personal moment of triumph came later. During a private gathering in the rebuilt ruins of the First Domain, surrounded by the pack leaders who had become her closest advisors and friends, she reflected on the journey that had transformed a xenobiologist into the queen of a galactic power. "Do you ever regret it?" asked Swift, now serving as the Confederation's Minister of Science. "Giving up your human life to become something new?" Alina considered the question carefully. She was no longer entirely human, her body and mind altered by years of adaptation to Kepler-4 for 2C's harsh environment. But she was also more than human, enhanced by technologies and symbiotic relationships that had been impossible before her transformation. "I didn't give up being human," she finally replied. "I became more human than I ever could have been alone." Humanity's greatest strength isn't our individual capabilities, it's our ability to adapt, to learn from others, to become part of something larger than ourselves. The gathering was interrupted by an urgent communication from the Confederation's deep space monitoring stations. Long-range sensors had detected an approaching fleet of unknown vessels, massive, ships using technologies that didn't match any known galactic civilization. Alina felt the familiar mixture of excitement and apprehension that had driven her. Throughout her transformation from scientist to queen, the galaxy was about to face another challenge, another opportunity to grow and adapt as she stood to address the crisis. Alina was surrounded by beings who had learned to trust her leadership through years of shared trials. Pack warriors whose ancestors had been mortal enemies now worked seamlessly with human engineers and alien diplomats. The hybrid civilization they had built together was about to face its greatest test. "Alert all Confederation forces," Alina commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had united a world and challenged a galaxy. "We have visitors, and something tells me they're going to be very surprised by what they find here." The approaching fleet would soon discover what the Galactic Council had learned years before, that underestimating the inhabitants of a Kepler-4 was a dangerous mistake. Alina had proven that Deathworlds didn't kill those who were strong enough to master them. They crowned them as queens. As the Confederation fleet moved to intercept the unknown vessels, Alina allowed herself a moment of pride in what they had achieved. She had arrived on Kepler-4 as a lone human scientist studying a hostile world. She was now the leader of a galactic power that was reshaping the very meaning of civilization. The Deathworld had indeed transformed her, but not in the way the galaxy had expected. Instead of being killed by its harshness, she had learned to embody its strength. Instead of being consumed by its predators, she had become their leader. The stars ahead held new challenges, new opportunities for growth and transformation. Alina faced them with confidence, knowing that whatever emerged from the unknown, she and her hybrid civilization would adapt, survive, and ultimately thrive. After all, they were the children of a Deathworld. Impossible odds were what they did best.